Now, this might seem just like good old New York City politics, sort of too inside baseball to really matter. But actually, it does. It should matter to all of us. And let me tell you why. Because right now, there is a battle being waged over the fundamental purpose of the Department of Justice. It all started with a letter, this letter, from the new acting Deputy Attorney General, Emile Beauvais. Now, you may recognize his name. You might also recognize his face. He was President Trump's personal attorney on 3 of his recent criminal cases. So Beauvais sent this letter to the Southern District of New York, and in it, he directed the federal prosecutors who are handling Eric Adams' criminal federal corruption case to dismiss the charges, not based on the merits or the facts of the case, but for 2 other reasons. One, because the indictment was brought too close to Adams' reelection, and more importantly, because they were a distraction to Adams' ability to facilitate Trump's deportation policies. Now, this letter, it is extraordinary. It openly demands that prosecutors act not based on the rule of law, but rather for political considerations. And you don't have to just take my word for it. We've got it here in his own writing. The Justice Department has reached this conclusion without assessing the strength of the evidence or the legal theories. That right there, that is exactly what the Justice Department is supposed to do. But rather, we are particularly concerned about the impact of the prosecution on Mayor Adams' ability to support critical, ongoing federal efforts to protect the American people from the disastrous effects of an unlawful migration and resettlement, as described in the executive order. This is political policy. This letter, this directive from the new DOJ leadership, is putting aside the facts and laws of this case and instead focusing on something else, using the Department of Justice as a facilitator or an enforcer of these political policies. Now, I will be very blunt with you as to why this hits me at my core. And as you can probably tell, I was a criminal prosecutor for almost 20 years. I have deeply rooted convictions about the role of the prosecutor. Prosecutors are entrusted with a remarkable amount of authority and power, and we feel it every day. I, along with my colleagues, we take this responsibility very seriously to seek justice, to follow the evidence where it leads you without consideration for wealth or for power, to uphold the rule of law. You know, every day that I served as a prosecutor, I felt honored to be able to do the right thing, to fight the good fight. I used to always say, I'm putting on the white hat. You know, in response to this letter, 7 career prosecutors, seasoned, well-respected, high-level prosecutors, they resigned because they refused to dismiss the case. They gave up their hard-earned livelihood rather than agree to this demand. And mind you, this was a bipartisan response to Beauvais' request. It had nothing to do with the specific political policy involved. The first prosecutor to refuse was Danielle Sassoon. She had recently been appointed by the Trump administration to serve as the interim AG at the Southern District of New York. She's a member of the right-leaning Federalist Society. She clerked for the conservative Justice Antonin Scalia. She had just written an op-ed criticizing former President Biden for his last-minute commutations. Now, Sassoon responded to Beauvais with her own letter. She said, because the law does not support a dismissal, and because I am confident that Adams has committed the crimes with which he is charged, I cannot agree to seek a dismissal driven by improper considerations, regardless of whether its dismissal would be politically advantageous to the defendant or to those who appointed me. Beauvais' response? Well, he put Sassoon and her entire team under investigation and then moved the case to the Washington office. Now, in Washington, 6 more high-level prosecutors, again, many of whom had just been elevated to their positions by Trump, refused to dismiss the case, turning in their resignations instead. So finally, Beauvais submitted the dismissal himself. You know, some historians are saying that this echoes the Saturday Night Massacre. Remember that? There, in the middle of the Watergate scandal, then President Nixon demanded that the prosecutor leading the investigation be removed. And rather than comply, 2 top prosecutors resigned in protest. Now the case is in the hands of U.S. District Judge Dale E. Ho. He will have to decide whether or not to accept this motion to dismiss. Now, typically, Judges follow the prosecutor's recommendation, especially when, as here, the prosecutor and the defendant are both in agreement. But here's the wrinkle. There's some concern that this dismissal is actually a quid pro quo. Now, both Adams and Beauvais are adamant that that is not the case here. But let's look at the facts. The first indicator of a potential quid pro quo is in Beauvais' letter itself. He is asking that the dismissal be conditional, which allows him to retain power over Adams, to continue the charges against him in the future if he so decides. This puts Adams in the position of having great incentive to follow the Trump administration policies, as Beauvais mentioned in his letter, so he's not prosecuted in the future. The other interesting fact to point out, President Trump isn't granting Adams a pardon in this case. Now, we know he can do that, right? He did it with the January 6th defendants. A president has that absolute right and power. No reasons need to be given. But with a pardon, Adams would be in the free and clear. There would be no more sword of Damocles hanging over his head, pressuring him to follow certain policies. But so far, no pardon. So now, Judge Ho has announced that he wants the prosecutors to come to court tomorrow to explain to him why they want this dismissal. What are their legal grounds? So we shall see. Who will win this battle here? And in turn, what exactly will our Department of Justice become moving forward?